Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jason. I want to join him in welcoming you all to our inaugural Global DAC conference. And I also want to join him in thanking our hosts, Columbia University and their Center on Energy Policy and the Carbon Tech Development Initiative, RMI and Breakthrough Energy, and our sponsors, our volunteers, and all of you for coming. Thank you so much. This is an exciting and critical moment in the evolution of direct air capture. And I want to just take a moment to share, based on my journey, why I think that is so. 17 years ago, I received an email from my father. I was a young investor in early-stage clean tech companies, and he was a professor here at Columbia University. And he had an idea for capturing CO2 directly from the atmosphere. He was inspired in this idea by another Columbia University professor at the time, Dr. Klaus Lackner. Both of them are backstage, and you'll hear from them next to tell you a little bit about their interaction and their journey and where they've come to today. The brutality of the climate math wasn't yet clear, I don't think, to either of them or any of us, that we would need to remove billions of tons of CO2 from the atmosphere in a few short years in order to address climate change. But we knew that the greenhouse gas effect took place in the atmosphere, and it was based largely on the concentration of CO2. So if you could remove CO2, if you could reduce that concentration, maybe you could contribute to addressing the greenhouse gas effect. So it seemed a potentially interesting idea. My firm put a little bit of money in, and off he went to found Global Thermostat, and off Klaus went to found his company. And then you had folks like Dr. David Keith found Carbon Engineering. You had Jan and Christoph at Climeworks found their company. And a few other pioneers get started down the journey of this space. My experience, I don't know about them, but my personal experience of the first 10 plus years of direct air capture was not a happy one. It was a very lonely journey. There was a lot of skepticism, understandably so. Removing CO2 in its dilute form from the atmosphere sounds very hard, and it is. Many people thought it might even be impossible. They certainly thought they would always be hopelessly expensive. Even at the 2015 Paris conference, where I went around and talked to many of the leaders in the room who were really focused on addressing climate change, the notion of removing CO2 directly from the atmosphere, whether by direct air capture or any other method, was really still quite foreign, just back in 2015. That all started to change towards the end of the last decade. We had a couple things happen. We had the 1.5 degree report from the UN. We had the National Academy of Sciences negative emissions report. We had Roger's report in California. Roger's somewhere in the audience. We also had climate change happening before our very eyes. It became a real experience, I think, for more and more of humanity. It wasn't quite like this past summer, but it was starting to gather steam, shall we say. So in the summer of 2020, a number of us, about 80 of us, in the midst of COVID, decided that we should get together and figure out what role direct air capture could and should play in the climate fight. It was, I think, the first sort of broad-based effort to take a look at the role that direct air capture could play in the future. And we spent 2 days, prepared for several months, and one of the major conclusions out of that discussion was that we needed a sustained multi-stakeholder effort to carry forward and help educate, engage, and mobilize society around direct air capture. And thus, the Direct Air Capture Coalition was born. Its core goal is to do that in a way that assures that we can deliver, in the time that we have, a DAC ecosystem that is sustainable, equitable, economic, and effective. I was so fortunate to quickly find Jason as a co-founder and a group of individuals, many of whom are here. Aaron Benjamin, Jamie Rogers, are my fellow board members, Chris Neidl, Sophie Gallois, a group of volunteers around the world who are willing to lean in and make the coalition a reality. And in just under 18 months, we have gathered over 100 stakeholders in this space, many of you, many of the leading emerging companies in the space, NGOs, leading universities, and a growing cohort of business innovators as well. And I really want to thank Jason for the terrific job that he has done in recruiting, organizing, and helping to start to create value for this community. I also really want to thank all of those who have joined the Direct Air Capture Coalition and become a part of our journey. Thank you so much for being here. This has truly been one of the most rewarding and exciting experiences of my professional life. For 17 years to work in this space, many of them, as I mentioned, not very positive, quite hard, uphill battle. And so quickly to see so many people recognize the need for what we're doing here and come together and start working together. So why are we here today? What's the point of this conference? The good news is that there's so much innovation and new ideas in this field. The original pioneers that I mentioned have been joined by an amazing spectrum of entrepreneurs exploring new solutions in DAC. Never underestimate the power of human ingenuity. Likewise, DAC is no longer just a concept. It's a thing. Day by day, more companies are starting to deploy in the field, although obviously still at a small scale, as Jason mentioned. DAC is also increasingly recognized as a key tool in the toolbox, not a silver bullet, but at least likely one of the silver buckshot that we'll need to deploy. The US and other countries around the world are really starting to step up. Look at 45Q and the DAC hubs here in the United States, and look around the world and you'll see a quite surprising level of support emerging globally. What I see today, both as the chair of the DAC Coalition and a commercial leader inside Global Thermostat, is an ecosystem that is rapidly maturing, with technology companies, project developers, investors, suppliers, engineering firms, corporate off-takers, NGOs, governments, and communities starting to interact and collaborate like never before. The beginnings of a self-sustaining commercial ecosystem is not that far off, and is probably closer than most people think. Both BCG, one of our sponsors here, and Bloomberg New Energy Finance, for example, in the last month or two have estimated that there's now 20x more demand for DAC than there is supply, and that is just growing. But let's not underestimate the challenge before us. If we're going to build a new sector the size of the locomotive sector or the automotive sector or the airline sector or the fertilizer sector, use whatever analogy you want, in a very, very short period of time, and to do so in a way that is truly good for people, profits, and planet, we have a ton of work to do. And that's the point of this conference, to identify what needs to be done in order to succeed in this historic mission. So we have organized the next 2 days in sort of three large thematic frames. First, let's visualize the future. What does success look like? What do we need success to look like? What is the future of DAC? Let's be very clear about what we think it is and how we're going to measure it. That's the focus of this morning's program. Second, let's do an honest assessment of the current state of DAC. Where are we today? Good, bad, and ugly. That's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. And finally, we'll spend tomorrow focused on exploring strategies for how we get from where we are to where we want to be. Charting the path to 2030 and 2050 and beyond. Clearly, we're not going to solve everything in the next 2 days, but this conference is meant to be the first in a series of annual conferences that we host, and the conferences themselves an annual milestone in an active, multidimensional, day-by-day effort across this community. So we can start right here, right now, accelerating our journey into the future. As we do so, I'd like to suggest a few key principles that I hope will be helpful. First, we need to listen, not just promote or push or talk. There's no way that we can successfully grow a whole new sector in a historically fast time frame if it is forced on people. Just not going to happen. It needs to not be forced on people, it needs to be good for people. It needs to be something that people want. I've told you that I've been in this space for 17 years, more than most. Hopefully I have something to bring to the table, and I'm trying to do that. But I would bet that there's more people outside of this sector who have value to add than there are currently inside the sector. We need to listen. We need to listen to feedback and criticism and improve from it. And I think you should expect that you're going to hear opinions, even here today, that you might not agree with. Please try to embrace that and learn from it. Second, we need to radically collaborate. Jason mentioned this. Creating a whole new ecosystem in an inherently multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder challenge. Yes, we're all adults and should embrace competition, but unless we find ways to creatively collaborate across traditional boundaries, there's no way we'll get there. I'm going to say this as frankly as I can. In 15 years of working in this sector, a sector filled with positive, passionate, and good people, all of you, I can remember less than half a dozen times that anyone, any organization, has come to me, or anyone I know working in this sector, and said, without an immediate self-interest, how can I help? That's not good enough. We're not going to get there with business as usual. We need to radically collaborate. Finally, and relatedly, we have to adopt a mobilization mindset. Yes, it's amazing how far we've come since just 2020. Look at all the new companies, the investment dollars, the legislation, but as Jason mentioned, we still have very few tons of DAC-driven CDR. As much progress as we made, are we truly yet acting as if our life depended on the success of our efforts here? Are we rushing solutions to the front like they're doing in Ukraine every day? I think we have to admit that we're not. We need to mobilize now. As Jason said, this is our opportunity and our challenge. The science tells us that we need to start removing 1 to 3 billion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by 2030, and that DAC needs to play a big part of that. But 2030 is only 74 months from now. That means that every month is almost 1.5%. Every 2 weeks is almost 1%. I hope that helps to put in focus how important these next 2 days are. No, we won't solve everything, but we can start right here, right now, developing the ideas, relationships, and actions that will give us a fighting chance to win this existential race. Let's do this. Thank you.